So let's take up question number 5. What are the various ways of hosting WCF service? In the previous session, we had seen that how we can host a WCF service in IIS. Now, with this approach, what happens is that whatever is a limitation of IIS becomes a limitation of a service. For example, one of the biggest limitation of IIS is that it only works on HTTP protocol. And then if your service is hosted inside IIS or inside the IIS container, what happens is that your service also can only run an HTTP protocol. And when we talk about service-oriented architecture, one of the biggest aspects of service-oriented architecture is flexibility. The flexibility can be in terms of supporting heterogeneous languages, heterogeneous platforms, and also heterogeneous protocols. So if your service gets tied up to a particular container or to a particular protocol or probably to a limitation of that container, then the word flexibility probably becomes very much confined to certain boundaries. So what Microsoft has done is that it has provided various ways of hosting WCF service. And what we'll do is that in this question we will try to see what are the various ways of hosting WCF service. The first one is that you can host a WCF service on IIS server. We had already seen this in our previous example, in our previous question, that is question number 4. But what we'll do is that we'll just revise the important points from the aspect of hosting WCF service on IIS. So let me pull out the project. Yeah, that's it. IIS understands that where the service is located, or what is the name of the class, or what is the namespace of the service, etc. from a file called as the .svc file. So for example, the current service what we have is service calculate cost. So the IIS web application directory should have this .svc file. Now this .svc file basically points to where the service is located, what is the code behind of the service. In case you are going to publish this on a production environment, then you need to provide the DLL name over here. So the .svc file is the core from which IIS comes to know that where the service is located. Second methodology which Microsoft has provided to host a service is self-hosting. So in other words, you can host your service in your own application domain. Now let's look at the code, how it basically looks like. Okay, the first thing which is very important is that you don't need to change anything in your service. So for example, whatever we had discussed in our previous question, everything remains same. In other words, your service needs to have an interface that's already there. You need to define your data contract, that's the same thing. You need to define your operation contract, that remains as it is. Then your actual logic of your code, or you can say your concrete classes, that is for instance over here it is a service calculate cost class, that remains the same. But what changes is that this is not going to be hosted in IIS, but it's going to be hosted in its own app domain. So what I've done is I've created a class called as TLS self-hosting, and in the static void main I have first created the object of service host, and then I have created an object of URI specifying that on which URI this service should run. And finally we need to create the service host object with the service class name. Now remember that this service class name is basically your concrete class name. It's not the interface, because you cannot create object of interface. So basically you need to specify here your actual concrete class service. So what I've done is that I have created a new service host, specified which class needs to be hosted, the service class, and on which address it will be hosted. And then I just said open, and I have kept my DOS prompt running. So in this way what happens is your service is running now, it's by itself in your own application domain. So I'll just revise the steps. You need to create the service host object, you need to create the address object, then you need to tell to the service host that which service you want to host, and then finally run the service host object. Okay, so what we'll do is that we'll just run this object. So let me set this as a startup project, and let me do Control F5. Now the service starts at the background. You can see this, the service has started. Now what I'll do is that just to see that if I can see the WSDL of it, I have taken up the address which was specified in the program. and you can see that this service is running. Now in order to consume the service, it exactly remains the same. You need to do add service reference, and you need to specify the URI. So the other steps for consuming the service, they just remain same. Sorry. So you can see that it will create a proxy object of it. You can give a namespace here, and you can use this service as a normal object, how you do for .NET. So at this moment I have consumed this as a calculate cost namespace service. That's what the service reference here is, and I provided the per product cost and the quantity. So in order to host your service in a self-hosted manner, you need to basically use the service host class. Now there are disadvantages of hosting the service in your own application domain, and we will be covering that in the coming up section. In other words, what are the advantages and disadvantages of hosting your service yourself and hosting your service in IIS. The third methodology which Microsoft has provided for hosting the service is the Windows Activation Service, that is the WAS server. This we are not covering in this video because the first thing is that this has been used, this is not so much frequently used. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we don't want to concentrate on things which are not really used in the market widely, so that we can cater to a lot of readers who basically the third way of hosting WCF service is by using WAS server, that is Windows Activation Service server. We are not covering this in this video because it's not in the scope. The only reason why we have not kept in the scope is it's not a widely used technology to host WCF services. If you ask me, 80% of the people use IIS for hosting service, and probably 20%, depending on the project scenario, use self-hosting service. So we are not covering this in this video, but yes, there is one more way which Microsoft has provided to host your WCF service, that is the WAS server. And what you can do is that you can just experiment around this, because the WCF service as a core doesn't change. So what changes is its hosting environment. In the coming up video, what we will do is that we will try to understand that what are the various advantages and disadvantages of hosting the service on IIS and hosting a service on your own application domain. And with that, we'll get an overall view that what are the best practices which has been followed in the industry.